Yeah, sure. I could talk about this for hours, but anyway, so let's for my audience who might not be familiar with you, do you just want to give a brief introduction, who you are, what you do, all that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. I'm Ernesto Gluecksmann. I'm one of the hosts of Through the Noise podcast, and it's a show that I've been exploring like innovations in clean technology. But however, prior to that, that's sort of a recent thing. I've had 20 years working with nonprofits dealing with their data technology, digital technology systems. And I don't know, I spent the last 6 years interviewing about 500 CEOs, executive directors, communication directors of nonprofits in the Washington area. So I'm not a nonprofit expert, but I feel like I got a good bead on what they do and how they do and why they do what they do. Just from working with them so much. But I'm like an embedded tech guy in this world of like influence and multi-stakeholder things that people do. And it's been an intriguing ride, but the change I've had towards clean energy technologies and just innovative companies, and like Tesla's story, like that definitely solidified it for me, going like, whoa, this is really, really happening. That's what made my managing partner and I was like, okay, it's time to change. It's time to shift gears. We want to go into this direction. So I still have a book of business with nonprofits, clients friends and contacts that I've had over the years, but I'm going down this new uncharted world for me. So it's been awesome having you on the show, Farzad, to give me a little bit of a taste. It's like a taste of what it was like working there. Your 4 years / a decade of your life that you gave. That was cool.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you having me on, dude. That was so fun. Yeah. And the name of the podcast again, Through the Noise podcast.
Through the Noise podcast. Yeah. There's a Through the Noise band. They're a pretty cool metal band, but it's Through the Noise podcast. So if you're going to look us up on YouTube, which is what I just started, I think I got like 30 subscribers, which is awesome. Nice. I'm happy for that. And I'm just still leveling that thing up. It's been an audio only show for the last 6 some years. So my audience is really on just a podcast, and in the Washington DC area. But I'm changing this new direction. So you're going on a new adventure. I'm going on a new adventure. So
yeah. Yeah, just trying out new stuff. What was so you talked about sort of like the clean tech sort of arena. What was the time? And just to give you a little bit of feedback behind sort of me going to your podcast. So Ernesto reached out, and he's obviously passionate about that part of the industry, and he's a fan of Tesla and enjoys Tesla. So I went on to sort of talk to him about that. But I also gained a lot of sort of interest in speaking to Ernesto as well, because of his sort of the nature of his background and sort of his understanding of where clean tech is going, and then the governmental aspect of that as well. Living in Washington D.C. and those areas, I think it's a very fascinating combination. But what I'm really curious to hear is what was the moment where Tesla became like a you kind of talked about, it's like, well, we saw Tesla, now this is an obvious thing that we're going towards. Like what was the moment, if you can paint that picture for us? Like what did that moment look like, and why was it so obvious at the time?
Yeah. So going back a little bit, I always thought of Tesla as like they had some interesting kind of battery cars, and I think I bought some shares years ago, just a handful, like when they were like at $300 a share or something like that. Yeah. An engineer mind, I didn't really dive into the story. I just liked the idea of battery technology, and it seemed like Tesla sort of had something, but I didn't think much of it. What happened to me was I spent, like I said, I interviewed all these executive directors, all these CEOs of these nonprofits, these mostly trade associations. So it's like the world of nonprofits is varied. But for me, I've always been interested in how businesses work. And actually, when I was trying to get my computer science degree at Maryland, I like discovered databases. And I thought, oh, if I learn about databases, this will be the brains of an operation. Like if I understand their database or how they're doing it, how they're tracking data, this will be the thing. And so And so I got into that, and then I got into the web world, doing websites and maintaining these systems for these nonprofits. So when I looked at like what types of nonprofits, because I'm in Washington, D.C., our backyard is basically the government. And that's like super complex and like mind-numbingly challenging to work in, or the companies that serve the government, which is not much better, right? Like they're like, it's like outsourced HR, and it's just really, it's just this world that I just wasn't that interested in, or this world of nonprofits that I didn't know much about. And so I picked nonprofits. Actually, one of the easiest things about nonprofits is they have to disclose their expenditures. Let's look at this form called 990. So I was able to find, oh, well, how much are they spending on tech? How big is this nonprofit? I got more insights there. So it just led me in this path of exploring this world. And so anyway, fast forward to a very specific conversation I had with a conservative nonprofit, the National Corn Growers Association. And I was talking to their executive director, John Doggett. And basically, you picture this guy, it was their lead lobbyist for 30 years for this group of members that grow corn. Now, they don't grow like regular corn you eat. They grow corn for like ethanol, for industry stuff. And so his main job is to try to find other markets to expand. Like he goes to Mexico and it's like, you should add some of our ethanol to your gasoline or reduce some of the particulates, and you could have your arguments whether that's true or not, or like it doesn't matter. I'm just understand that this guy, his whole job was to help his members grow their industry. And somewhere we're having this conversation, he said somewhere around 2014, they started to change their tune. Basically, he played defense on Capitol Hill for anything that would curtail their industry, the fuel usage, anything that, climate change to them was like, what are you talking about? We're making fuel here for the future, right? Fossil fuels, but in this case, corn stuff. So it didn't register to them. But around 2014, he started getting some members complaining or reaching out because what had happened in some fields in, I think, South Carolina, just a little bit of extra variability in the annual weather patterns that happen, pushed just enough, like a micro centimeters, tiny amounts of water table pushed up salt into the field. So like he told me about it. He's like, you could walk the field in the morning and you would see the field would glisten, refractions of the salt that had basically been pushed into these fields, and it ruined the ability for the fields to yield corn. And so then suddenly these companies that didn't give a shit about climate change really were going, oh shit, this is actually this is happening. And so John Doggett was like, oh yeah, we were totally wrong about climate change. They flipped their tune and they started creating a sustainability group within the association. I looked them up. They created a memorandum of understanding and cooperation with the Environmental Defense Fund, which is like a real practical organization institute to help better farming practices. Like all kinds of things suddenly exploded out of that process. And I'm just sort of sitting there kind of hitting me in the face like, wow, this like super, but I mean, like these guys have like an office right on F Street where like they have a window, you could see the Capitol right there with a few blocks. And it's like, that's important because you bring your members, your biggest corporate farming members, you want to show them like you can just walk into that building and start talking to, some of those Congress people, some of those staff, like it's a thing, right? To demonstrate for the associates to demonstrate their effectiveness, their impact, the value, right?
Yeah.
So it was in that moment that it kind of hit me like, oh shit, if this is starting to affect them, well, where else is it affecting? And I started looking around and you just start to realize that the issue is starting to bubble up everywhere. Now it's not at at crisis level at every industry that's out there, other associations. There are definitely associations that are still like, they have like no clue what to do about it, right? And they have no idea how to, reduce their carbon footprints or any kind. And but all, like everything that grows, the paper industry, fertilizing institute, they're all under pressure right now, and they're responding in different ways, sometimes in more of a defensive action, trying to say that they're not as toxic. The airline fuels industry will cite like, we're experimenting with some biofuels, and by the way, we're only 2% of like the whole gamut, so we're really not the main causes. But effectively, the conversation in Washington, D.C. has changed from like denying or obfuscating to like, oh yeah, it is a thing. And shit, we have to do something. What do we do? It's the next stage for many of these groups, right?
Yeah.
But anyway,
that's really interesting. So really these guys didn't really start. These guys really didn't start really caring, or let's say once it started hitting their pockets. Once it really started hitting them from a profitability perspective, or the ability to actually generate some sort of product, did they really start focusing hard on the climate change issue, right? Like that's when they really started focusing their gaze over. Okay, where does so for your own personal journey, so is Tesla sort of the cog that, as you were kind of like discovering the different aspects of how this was impacting other companies, you stumbled upon Tesla as like that forcing function towards more attention towards sort of climate change being a real issue? How did that play in?
That's a good one. No, actually, no, actually, what happened was, it was around the time where, I grew up, I went through the dot-coms. I'm in my 40s. I went through the dot-coms. I went through like the social media, hype cycle, Web 2.0. I don't like calling it social media anymore. I just call that scroll media. It's just scroll. It's not social. It's just bad. Yeah. But anyway, and so I was losing that like, oh, technology has a real, impact. I was, when AI started to come along, Amazon Web Services started providing some of these neural network, systems and sort of commercializing some of this work. I still didn't quite like see like, all right, well, yeah, there's interesting concepts, but I'm not really seeing the true impact. When you see SpaceX land a ship. Okay, that's not done through simple, like somebody coding the algorithm to land it. Like that's vastly more complicated. And so that kind of sent off like, look, pay a little more attention to what's happening here. But I think the reality of Tesla was, as I was looking at, well, where else is this sort of, where are the other industries are going to be impacted by climate change? Where are they doing meaningful work? Where are they more greenwashing right now? I come across Tesla's like fight of FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, that's what turned me on to the story of Tesla. Cause I was like, the amount of like nonsense coverage was just shocking to me. I was like, what the heck? Why? What is it with all the animosity towards this company who is trying to electrify the auto fleet, right? On their own with maybe an eccentric CEO, but like no one else is doing it. Like this is our best shot, right? Like what is it? And you start to pull at the threads and you start to recognize that, it's the beginning, in my assessment, of the auto industry kind of imploding. And the auto industry pays a lot of money for media attention. And so there's a lot of reporters and people that cover the auto industry that have also at stake their paychecks if this transition doesn't go smoothly. So, as you pick up one story of Tesla and then you dig into the facts and you realize the story just kind of like didn't even bother to look, didn't even bother to Google. And then you go to the next story and go to the next story. And then you realize, man, there's a concerted effort. I think I can't pinpoint it, but there's definitely this din towards this anti, EV approach. And I just think that it's going to get worse before it gets better, in my opinion. Right.
What makes you think that? Why do you think it's going to get worse?
Well, like, I was looking at the latest sort of examples were like the Oklahoma bill by what's his name, Senator. I want to get his name right.
Can't remember if you sent this to me.
Yeah, I want to get this right. You can edit this like searching.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike Dubrinsky. Mike Dubrinsky. You know, I like. It's so like it's you know, he gets a ton of money from dealerships, and the dealership model has been his business. Like it's his. He had owned dealerships. He understands dealers. He understands that model in Oklahoma. But to like create a 70-page bill, right, with like vague enough language that's you could tell you could be interpreted one way or the other, and leave it to the enforcement to figure out what it all means. It's aimed at it's think that's aimed at. And I didn't go read through the whole 70-page. I got better things to do. I'm not that guy.
No one's got time for that. Not even the guys writing it have time for that. You know?
No, I can tell you a lot about that. Where can I go with all that? Like, yeah, no one has time to read these things, much less write them. It's all outsourced to lobbyists that are hired by the associations, these nonprofits that pay to, you know, get their issues on the books to do this. Like, you know, I did some work for Senator Carl Levin of Michigan back in he passed away a few years ago. But like one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful senator at the time, but like definitely at the top. I mean, he was in charge of the Senate. What is it? The Senate Arms Committee, the committee that oversees the military establishment, right? Like, he's like keeping an eye on like all the investments the military does and for what reasons and so forth. Like you would go into his office, beautiful on Capitol Hill, you know, like tall ceilings, but like his staff, they're crammed in there. It's like stuffed, and it's like they have maybe. He's at the top, like it's seniority. So that he gets maybe like 50 people working for his, you know, and he splits them up in the district. Some are in Michigan, some are in DC, and they have to like keep track of everything Michigan, all the issues that bubble up in Michigan as it pertains to the federal government, as it pertains to national issues, as it pertains to the military, as it pertains to all those interests, as it pertains to technology. Like it's like you look at it, it goes, there's not enough people to keep track of it all, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just dealing with email was like a 2-person job, and they had that software that would collate all the email messages, people, all the constituents, everybody sending in there, I hate you, Senator Carl Levin, for doing this or that, or whatever it is, just to be able to get a sense of like, all right, well, we got 400 messages about this issue, but another 1,000 against it. So we got to be careful how we make a statement around this particular, like just amassing that and trying to be responsive to your constituents. It's just not enough people in these organizations, in the political office, right? Yeah. And so what do they rely on? They rely on lobbyists. They rely on lobbyists making the case. They know that they have a biased perspective, but then they go, well, give me the data. And the lobbyists go back to the association, their trade group, and they go, hey, I need more data here. I need more invested in putting together this research paper because we have like one senator or Congress representative that is sympathetic to our cause, but he can't go on publicly making statements or make a bill or push it without us like really showing him how it's going to impact his constituent services. Like all they care about is how does it impact their constituents? They don't necessarily care about the grander things, right? Which is unfortunate. But I think that's sort of like, deal making and like the fancy restaurant here in Washington, D.C. Like it's like that's like an old trope at this point. I think that model's in trouble in general. The trade association model is in trouble. It's harder and harder for these groups to keep members interested and focused and organized around a particular issue. So you have to understand, like associations, like I don't know, I could stop and if you want.
No, keep going. Keep going.
The CEO or the executive director of an association is like the role, the specific role is a political role. It's a politician's role because you you're always under pressure to be effective advocate for the industry, but any one strategic decision or direction you might make could turn off half your members, right?
Right.
And your members start questioning, why are they paying dues for the positions the association is taking, right? So these guys become really good at just hedging and not making any strong commitments, finding the middle of the road. I mean, that's the job. So, the association world is not exactly the most exciting, but all of that work that they do with all of the staff is to help create an environment for these fiercely competitive, ordinarily competitive members, owners of businesses or whatever, to come together, set aside their competitive differences, and then really try to address particular issues of the industry. And so it's usually driven by crisis. It's usually driven by crisis. A good crisis for an industry is kind of a windfall for a good association team, because it motivates the membership to do something, right? And there's like a self-regulation, like even that aspect of it. Like the government can't regulate everything. It relies on trade associations to set certain standards, to moderate themselves, to referee their own industry. Like if there's like a safety issue bubbles up in a particular industry to an extent that regulators start going, hey, like your product or your service or the way you do these things is like causing this external harm, and we need, you need to do something about it, or we will do it, and our prescription's not going to be in favor, right, of the industry. That's executive director runs back, goes to the member, like, we better do something because this is going to happen if we don't. And so that usually galvanizes the membership to like, okay, organize themselves. Now, they have to be very careful too, because there's like a lot of things like, price fixing and collusion. Like these are big no-nos, but like if you put a bunch of bigwigs in a room at a fancy resort or something like that, I mean, that might happen. So you have to remind them, like, we cannot do that, or we'll get into serious trouble. But there's always some way, like, around some of these things. So you think of safety as a good example, because like who would not be in favor of creating more safe practices or safe products or safe manufacturing processes? And so, we need to reduce these injury rates of our products, like cigarette industry or something, right? We need to create labels. Let's all agree to allow some labeling to be on our packages. Like, why would the members ever agree to put labels on their package? It increases the cost. Well, if you do that, it's the carrot of the government, right? Where they may force it upon us, and we won't be able to control the label sizing. Yeah. But that little bit of extra investment for those labels increases the barrier of entry for newcomers. So you're effectively creating a market barrier, the de facto market barrier. You can't talk about it in those terms because that's illusion, but that's sort of how it's implied. And so it kind of,
so they're playing games. So like, they're just constantly trying to like figure out how to like preserve themselves with what seems like a legitimate cause, but at the same time, the variables that are part of that cause will also hurt their competition or the other players that might also get into that specific game.
Would make it difficult for them to come in.
More difficult,
more difficult. So,
have you been following this whole thing with like Biden like omitting saying Tesla for like the longest time? Were you aware of that? Yeah. So totally. Like everything that you just described sort of slightly reminds me of that sort of, especially like the first like 75% of what you were talking about. Is there, and there's a lot of like talk in the Tesla community about how GM and Ford are totally in the pocket of the administration. And there's definitely some weird stuff going on in the background that is not allowing that, where Biden, views it very negative if he says Tesla because of his constituents. And then you got Mary Barra, alongside Biden, and saying that they're the leaders. Like, okay, so how legitimate is that based on your experience being so close to Washington? Like, is that a legitimate statement?
I mean, I have to say, I'm just the embedded tech guy. I deal with their data.
Yeah.
I'm
Of
still
course.
working on it.
Yeah, you're not gospel.
So it's like,
everybody listen to what Ernesto's saying. No, this is just, we're just trying to figure it out, right? We're just trying to see, and based on your background and what you've seen,
look, Ford and GM have unions. They have unions, right? And the Democrats rely a lot on unions to get out the vote, to get union support. It's a lot of people. And it's an unfortunate thing, because I looked at that in disbelief as well. Like, I still think, like, how lame, can't you also advocate for unions, but also create the space for just all EV manufacturers to, like, bring them and stop with the, I just think that, that particular speech that Biden was giving, I think somebody told them, like, hey, don't mention Tesla because they're not a union shop. And then so he just got carried away with just like, oh, he was at the event. He's like getting, he's trying to, like, they're changing. She's showing like the new GM truck, whatever. He just sort of, there's just no time for, especially the president of the country, to pay attention to every single thing that's happening. And all he can pay attention to are the base and the base that got him into that spot. Like, he's thinking re-election. He needs their PAC money to come into the campaign. He needs the super PAC money to support, the Democrats in general need that. They don't have a good, they have trouble. There's trouble for them getting sufficient funding. Believe it or not, I know some people are probably listening and be like, what are you talking about? It's not. Yeah. So the short answer is, like, yes. Ford, GM contribute to these, that's their companies. They contribute and they organize they work with their unions and their employees, and they ask their employees and unions to contribute to politicians that have their issues on top of mind. Mm-hmm. That is the key. Like in Washington, like, one of the ways that an association shows value is you host your annual event in Washington, D.C. You fly in all your, let's say it's a physicians group, owners of independent practices. You fly them all in there, and you tell your lobbyists, hey, tell like Senator so-and-so that we're going to have 100 of their members and they want to hear a little bit. And the lobbyist runs over, like, we're going to have it'll be real easy. Just come in right at 6:30, right after you're done working, give a 20-minute speech. Here's the prepared notes. Here's the audience. And, here's what they're mostly interested or motivated by. And I think we'll be able to raise, about 10 or 20, some $5,000 contributions to your PAC, to your public, to your PAC. The PACs, it's an interesting world there. This is where I'm definitely out of my league, but it's like it's like a rate limited method of contributing to the party, to the politician, to, up to $5,000 per individual. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of money for me, for you, probably, for a lot of us, but there's a limit to that. And so what happens is these politicians have to, like, constantly be talking to lots of people. And so if you have a huge union audience at a factory and you set up the whole event and there's going to be, like, 2,000, 3,000 people there, that's a big opportunity to show, like, hey, I really care about you guys. Can you help me out with some cash? Mm-hmm. Make your contributions, donations, and so forth. And what happens is the association can then the lobbyist demonstrates his 6-figure salary and goes, look, I got so-and-so to your annual event. And the executive director can stand by and, like, the members go, wow, like, we've been contributing our dues to the association and we feel like there's at least somebody fighting for our cause on Capitol Hill, right? Yeah. But I think that whole model is is in trouble. I'm not the only one. I've talked to other association executives and people. It's the vitriol that's happened on Congress is a big factor, but it's not the only one. I think a lot has to do with super PACs. I think a lot has to do with just the super PACs is like it's sort of like a PAC, but it's a different entity where you don't have rate limits on how much you can contribute. Mm-hmm. You can write $10,000, $1 million, how you can give all your life savings to a super PAC, and then the super PAC can spend it in any way that you could be in part of the committee, you could be part of the super PAC committee and direct how you're going to spend that money against or for some issue. There's no limits. The only thing is that the super PAC can't do is coordinate with the politician or with the political party. So they can't say, hey, I raised $2 million in the super PAC. I can only give you $5K to your PAC, but I raised $2 million. How do you want us to spend this money to help you win re-election? They can't do that. The way they get around it is the super PAC goes, okay, I see that you need help getting the vote out in this particular region. So we're going to hire a bunch of volunteers and we're going to go get the vote out for you, dear politician.
It's like an extension arm, basically, of the politician.
Yeah, we're going to publish it on our website. We're not going to even talk to the politician. We're never going to communicate. We're never going to coordinate. That's the key. We're not going to, because that would run against federal election laws.
But what's stopping them from coordinating before they actually do that, right? Like, could that all that stuff?
But they don't have to. They don't have to. They just publish it, and then the campaign people keep track of what all those guys are doing. And like, great, we don't have to cover the state of Iowa. We can now go.
I see.
Problem solved. And so what happened? So, to give you a sense of how much money I looked this up, and it's something like they're expecting $13 billion to be spent in the 2022 campaign cycle. God. That is, by the way, nearly the amount of money we're going to give Ukraine to help deal with rebuilding.
And that's not even for the president. That's just for the Senate and like House and Senate and all the other stuff, right? So that's not even presidential. Right. I
think it's just general. I didn't quite get general, but it's 13 billion. I mean, it's just an astronomical amount of money that's just dumped in there because there's no caps anymore. There's no limits. There's no there was only a certain amount of money you can give to each politician in every party, and it had a cap. And so at a certain point, if you're a really wealthy group or wealthy individual, there's only so much. I can't stuff any more money in there. So the super PAC, and thanks to Citizens United and the Supreme Court's judgment, they opened that up. So that's why I think like this whole dog and pony show of the association bringing in the congressperson and generating a few that's like the old school way. That's just dwindling. These lobbyists, the attorneys around that, it's not the same. And the vitriol on the federal level has really pushed a lot of efforts towards state stuff. So they go into states where you can actually have more measurable potential impact, or even smaller community efforts. Right, a lot of money and efforts being put into that. It's kind of giving up on the Fed side. Or on the regulations, so sort of like engaging with the actual the EPA or whatever, as they come up with new regulations, trying to help shape it in one direction or another. I mean, one little bit of regulation worded a certain way could spell millions and millions of dollars for an industry, one way or the other. So it's like these sort of needle threading over periods of years, and nothing is certain. So how does an association executive and staff and the lobbyists and everybody justify their efforts? And it's hard, but one of the ways they do it, and I'll give you a quick story on this one, but one of the ways they do it, which is weird to me, but makes sense. I'll give you the story of the footwear world. So there's a different conversation I had with them, but there's an association for shoe distributors and manufacturers of our shoes. And so picture this, something like well over 90% of our shoes are made overseas. They're made mostly in China. And so that's kind of a problem because if China decided to hurt us, they could just say, all right, we're not making shoes anymore.
We're all running
and there's
barefoot.
Nobody here knows how to make shoes. So you better duct
and that's and they own a lot more than shoes, right? That's a problem that we could face with a bunch of stuff, but that's a topic for a different day.
That's just one of them, right?
Yeah.
So this small association whose biggest member was Nike. Basically all they did was talk about tariffs and weird regulations. They had weird old tariffs in the books, women's shoes get charged more for some reason than tennis shoes or something. They're constantly trying to get that approved. But one of the biggest pieces of legislation that they had going was this thing. I don't know if you heard TPP, Trans-Pacific.
Yeah.
So
that was back in the Bill Clinton days, right?
Yeah.
Or before? Yeah.
Yes. Before 11 countries, including Vietnam, they were in like Australia, the United States. They were going to create this like pact between them all, kind of like a free, lower the barriers to trade, and we're going to be able to exchange. And then hopefully we don't have to manufacture all our shoes in China. We can do them in Vietnam or other places where the cost of labor is paired to what happens in China, right?
Yep.
So as you can imagine, you're dealing with countries now, not never mind like a little industry in your trade association, the polemics around that, or your country's like national issues. You're dealing with entire countries, regions trying to figure this out. I mean, it's like a decade of effort just to get to the point where you think you have something that everybody could sign and pass in their legislature. Oh, like it's just an amazing amount of work. And Trump gets elected, and you would think, you know, Trump being a conservative guy or whatever, big money guy, you would think he would be like, all right, great. There's millions of dollars are going to be made doing this kind of trade. No, on the contrary, I think because the type of more populist position he had, he just went and just like nixed the whole trade deal. He said, we're not going to join it. So there went a decade of work. And this footwear group that I was helping to make a podcast, and they still do a successful podcast. Come in and like, you know, they're not too beaten up about it, but I feel like it's a touchy subject. And I was like, so what are you guys gonna do now? TPP. And like one of the guys looked at me, he's like, oh, well, yeah, we're on the defense now. That's it. It's like the attitude is they were pushing to make this deal happen. Be one of the voices on Capitol Hill saying this is going to be great for our industry. It's going to help us, you know, reduce our reliance on China. Overnight, that gets all thrown out. So they go back to the association. It's not a loss. But we kept it from getting worse. You know, we've been here advocating for your issues. And it's true. They're not in control of what the president did there, that it happened, but they can flip the switch and make the case that if the association isn't there, if they're not contributing their dues, then things could get a lot worse than just losing TPP. Like other things could come down the pike. So we got to go on the defense now. We got to start thinking, you know, creatively of like, where's the next potential threat to our businesses? And so effectively the association gets to weave this in-between line, depending crisis to crisis to crisis, right? So it's like kind of like, yeah, it's like, I don't know. I always thought like these like executive directors, CEOs were like the titans of industry. They had they had a clear understanding of the industry needs, a clear understanding of where they need to go. Yeah. What has to happen, and if there was a big problem, you go to the big guy. You know. Yeah. This is far from the reality. The reality is they're not the big guys. They're just they're trying to orchestrate some consensus.
Yeah, they're steering the ship towards where the team is like they're taking recommendations from the team and other voices, and then they're kind of trying to make a decision. Okay, this is the direction we should go, just based on all the data that we've gathered. At least that's what I've seen.
Yes, based on the members, based on what the board wants, based on like if we go this direction, how it might not upset as many members. We might not lose. We'll lose a couple of members here, but won't lose the. So all the positions are like watered down, and they're just, you know,
suboptimal. Suboptimal, which is very like that's such a fascinating sort of story you just went through, because if I compare that, like say the thing I'm closest to is like something like a Tesla, for example, right? Who appears to be like counter to that. It appears that they're just doing whatever the fuck they want, essentially, you know, and you know, politicians be damned. And there's been a very clear like almost disdain towards sort of that world of like lobbyism or trying to get certain teams or groups on your side to achieve your goal. It seems like Tesla's just doing it their own way and they don't really care. But as you were talking through, the thing that really jumped out to me was, you know, and this is kind of also based on your comment of like, you know, I think over time the FUD might get worse, you know, for Tesla, is like, you know, you gave us a really good insight into how a lot of those relationships work. So in the event So in the event that, say, your Ford and your GMs and your companies that are in America that have supposedly pretty strong lobbying power and are within, they're pretty entrenched within government, if they start to fail, okay, if they start getting into a situation where your Ford is no longer generating profit because they haven't been able to pivot fast enough to electric cars, and you have your GM that's going through the same exact thing, like what I'm very curious to see is how much louder and how much more aggressive the tone gets in government, either towards a movement towards EV or anti-Tesla. Because we already kind of saw, with the recent happenings with Biden and sort of that administration, is that, the omission of Tesla wasn't necessarily anti-Tesla. It was very like pro GM and pro Ford.
Like
but
shunning.
Exactly. But do you I'm curious, I'm very curious to see if it's going to be like reversed the deeper we go into it, where the government, because the other thing I'm thinking about too is okay, you have Elon Musk, who's this, the richest person in the world. And if Tesla continues to grow and grow, that person and that company is going to gain even more and more influence per se, because, that you have a market cap of, it could be the largest company in the world. It's already the richest person in the world who's going to become even richer. And then you have these weird dynamics that, depending what kind of person or administration is running the government, those things can be viewed very negatively. Tesla's monopolizing. Elon Musk is a dirty billionaire. He doesn't care about working people, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what is the likelihood that the government straight up just turns negative against Tesla? They're kind of like with Amazon, because I feel like that, I don't know if you agree, but there's a certain tone with Amazon where Amazon bad. I believe one of the warehouses just unionized yesterday or today. So how do you see that playing out? Because to me, that's one of the things I'm afraid of, is the government just straight up turns negative on something like a Tesla, where and they go pro everything else because of that dynamic. I don't know if I'm talking crazy now, but
I think it's already happening. I think it's already happening. There's lots of signals in the noise of all this that I pick up on, like Ford coming out
through the noise. Through the noise.
Yeah. There you go. Ford coming out and saying that they're going to have two companies, one for their ICE companies and one for their EVs. And then the guy looking straight in the camera going, but we're not going to stop investing in ICE engines. We're definitely going to. I don't. Yeah. That kind of gave me that weird. No, you're like, if I was thinking rationally about the potential and knowing that the days are numbered for ICE vehicles, no matter what it is that we do and the future's uncertain, I'm thinking having two entities is setting it up to be sell the assets, get rid of it at some point in the future and refocus this thing. That's how I would interpret that. And the guy looking on the camera and telling you, the CEO telling you that they're not going to stop investing in that. I don't know. That's a weird one to me, right? Mm-hmm. I got Washington D.C. is full of Democrats here, and I've been surprised when I brought up, for a little while I was definitely bringing up Elon a lot, probably too much to some friends, but I was surprised by how quick some friends have already a knee-jerk reaction towards Elon as a personality, and lack of understanding of the technology, the challenge that it took to even get there, right? They have they don't have a deep understanding of what's happened in that story, so they can't mesmerize at it this is amazing what's actually been accomplished so far, right? But the road's not clear yet. I think of all the engineers and all the people working at Tesla, they're focused on technology and driving, the solution has to be, and we got to turn this fleet of cars over. We have to globally, not just in the US. But any group that's highly engineering focused, tech focused, they're not necessarily thinking comms. They're not thinking legislative. They're not, it happened to every, I remember when it was a big deal when Microsoft first opened up an office here in Washington, D.C. years and years and years ago, well after Microsoft was getting a lot of negative attention for being so aggressive with like, I remember back in the day, like you could start a company, write a piece of software on the Microsoft platforms like Windows 95 and older, right?
Yep.
And if it did even a little, a bit of money on it, you could get a call from Microsoft and be like, hey, we want to buy you out. We want to buy that thing. And if you said no to whatever price they were offering, then they'd be like, okay, but we're just going to make it then. And then you'd be out of business. The leverage that they had was just so outsized. It felt like, so eventually some of that starts to trickle in. Hey, Microsoft, you can't be doing that. Oh shit. Okay. Well, we got to put some lobbyists to tell them why we get the right narrative. That's the wrong narrative. We're helping the little, so in other words, a tech company develops something, it becomes disruptive. The potential and the scale is so significant. And then suddenly they're the target. And then that's usually when they go out creating, finding out that they have to have a presence here. They have to have something. I think Tesla's like part of an alliance, Zeta Alliance or something. There's all the EVs like Rivian. There's like a little association of EV cars. And I think that like we can make this argument where Tesla has the money to defend themselves, defend their interest in Oklahoma. That exists.
Yeah.
But my concern is that there's not enough, other than Reddit and Twitter and YouTube and like awesome people that are out there defending Tesla's reputation. Yeah. I mean, there's not a group necessarily representing the sort of like the retail investor, that the fans, or I guess Tesla bros. I hate to use that term. That's not
the community, the family, the Tesla
the community,
family, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
There's the communication effort existing on its own organically. There's the righteous cause associated with like the technology it is viable. It does exist. It does work. It's going to scale. It's going to change everything. Like that all exists, and it's the right thing to do. We have to do it. Somebody has to do it. Somebody has to do it. Right. And if we wait for government to get around to changing the parameters of how much carbon we can, industries can generate, we're going to be waiting for a long time. There's just no time to wait. But like, what I'm seeing is there's no response from a group that's should work at making sure that people don't throw grit into the transition. So by that, I mean, we need companies like Tesla, even though they have the richest man in the world and they have billions of dollars, they still need help because they're the target. That's everyone's pointing at them, and they're coming at any which way they can get to. First, it was media about the technology or their ability to actually create a viable car. Then it's about safety concerns or batteries burning. I mean, like the battery one is even the craziest to me because it's like there's no fire in the battery car happening. Like there's 2,000-degree fire with a box of like bomb level amount of fuel behind it. Like, and everybody drives that without any issues. And all the articles never cite statistics around that, right? Like, okay, right. But it's like this guy, this state senator in Oklahoma. Like he goes out, he puts the bill together in a committee, quietly crafting this thing, how we're going to protect our dealerships with like this movement, this thing that's coming in, Tesla. And then they pass it, and then somehow some reporter covers that bill's passage out of committee. That cycles up into the national news. Like, oh, look, Tesla's about, because anything that could impact the stock, Tesla might have to pull out of Oklahoma. All of that has happened without any real back pressure. Like if there was this is again out of my league. If there was a super PAC around supporting efforts to move things quicker, to transition faster, there could be an effort around that, where you see that in a committee and then you fund a communication campaign around, hey, we're here too. And it's not Tesla. It's a bunch of other people, the community, right? Like I think that's needed because I mean, there's probably listeners on your show that are sitting on like 6, 7, I know 8-figure sums of money that it's been a windfall. They got in lucky with Tesla. They follow this. They love and they're wondering what they can do with that. Well, that's what you do. You
Sure.
get together, organize, create something that there's some back pressure, something that'll make that politician think, wait a minute, is there a group that I would really piss off that would then try to unseat me or work, do something to grind up my political aspirations in this particular space if we push this along? It might not do anything to that particular effort, but there needs to be something that can get into the news cycle that shows that there's a community here that's wider, much larger, organized, interested in making sure that this transition happens as fast as possible.
What's really interesting about that dynamic is that what at least what I've observed, and I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I think what's really interesting is that Tesla has been able to essentially go as fast as they humanly can already without any help. But I think the transition of everybody else is really what is a way more important here, because there could 100%. There could be a scenario here where, say, Ford and GM's and everyone else's incentives to move to EVs is 100% going to be profit driven. And it does seem like now they're finally recognizing that, hey, like if we don't do something about this EV thing, we're probably potentially could go out of business, or we're losing out on a piece of the pie that's not happening. But what I'm very interested to see is that, say, what I found, at least from my having followed the company for as long as I did, and so on and so forth. What's really interesting about the Tesla community is that, and anyone who disagrees with me, put it in the comments below, is that I think that there is a lot of us that think that Tesla doesn't need that help. That they don't need that help because so far they've been able to make it happen. You think about literally, like I said before, like they're going balls to the wall, and they're so freaking demand constrained that it doesn't really matter. They could probably still grow into their demand for the next 10 years or so, and there doesn't need to be anything to help Tesla get any positive press or some positive relationships from the government, because they've already done it. They're going to keep doing it. People that want to buy Tesla they already know that, and they're going to buy the Tesla. But Tesla can only make so many cars. So like in a situation where, say, Tesla is making, like, this is where my head really goes to. This is where I get really concerned, is like, even if Tesla were to make 20 million cars a year, which is twice as much as the current biggest automaker right now. I think Toyota right now makes 10 million, and Tesla's plans are to get to 20 million by 2030. That's great. So Tesla is going to get to 2030. But what about the other 80 million cars that get produced every single year? Where are those cars? I think that's where that sort of shift in tone from that perspective, or the drive from having a voice in government, or having a voice there that says every single freaking automaker needs to go to EV yesterday. And we need to secure a supply chain that's locally sourced so that we're not dependent on another country. You watch this whole Russia craziness that's been happening with Ukraine, and showing how a place like Germany, for example, is so freaking dependent on Russia's oil to run their country. What we don't want us to be in a situation in is that we're transitioning to electric vehicles, yet we repaint this picture again where we have to be incredibly dependent on a separate power who may not potentially have our best interest in mind long term. So that's where I see this going, that sort of this valuable discussion and this sort of thing in government to try and create that voice, is like everyone else needs to jump on board. And perhaps, who knows, maybe in 5 years' time, we may have a sort of dynamic where there are voices that are anti-Tesla, or for some reason Tesla falls out of favor, or God forbid, say something happens to Elon and he's no longer at the company, and for whatever reason, and then say Tesla's for some reason struggling to gain that market share that we're looking to do. And now if you have all these voices against Tesla, that could cause a problem. So that's where I definitely could see having a loud, prominent voice in government or in those sort of environments could be very helpful for the overall mission. Because, GM and Ford, they're not really, they may seem like they are talking the game about going electrification, but they're not really carrying the baton like a Tesla is, and trying to encourage them to do that is I think very important.
No, I think the most outspoken CEO was the Stellantis group guy, who was saying like he was saying,
I think it was Herbert Diess from VW. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Herbert. Yes, yes. But the one that
Yeah.
actually shared his disdain for the fact that they're asking him to do the impossible was
Mm.
Stellantis. Like he's the one going, the rate of change, the investment that we have to do to flip this is ridiculous, right? People are pressuring him, like you got to do something, right? Like, you could
Yeah.
see it out of it in the way he communicated that thing. And I just, you look, this is a huge workforce that's going to be impacted on every level: dealerships, parts distributors, service stations.
Yeah.
I mean,
The entire
the
supply
energy,
chain is going to get disrupted.
like you think Tesla has great cash flow? Well, not if they have to take on all of those countering efforts against him. And at first, it's been like, it's just like this little toy company making the Roadster or whatever, right? 10 years ago, 14 years ago, whatever. Now it's like, oh, well, they're making good profit. Maybe we should do a little bit. But in the future, it's going to be, oh, shit. We can't even get there. That's the threat to our business. We have to, and then it's like major push to do something that like just grinds that to down. If you can just throw rocks in front of the lead pack to slow down in a race, they'll slow down so that you can catch up, and then you can show how great and innovative you were as well, right? And like they have the access because they've been investing in that access, and they've
been playing the game for a while.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that like, I don't know where the future is going to go, but what I'm advocating, or what I would say to like anybody that's curious, is like, it's not that hard actually to get your voice out there. You don't have to hire a lot of, expensive lobbyists in Washington, D.C. to start knocking doors for you on Capitol Hill or any of that. Like that game is dwindling away. They're not even as effective. They're struggling just to show the value to the best heeled, trade associations in the country. Like they struggle. It's on the side of like at state level. It's on the side at the county level. That's where a lot of impact can happen real quick. And it's on the side of like communications, like not just tweeting, but like paying to play, boosting those tweets. And forget like op-eds even. It's not even there. It's just getting messaging, communications. That's sort of like, that's the world. And that's what super PACs are doing. Getting the vote out on a, I watched Promised Land with Matt Damon and Francis, I forgot her name, but there's like kind of a way of, if you watch that movie, you get a sense of how something like the way the big guys can play games, but that game is available too. And it's not that, I don't want to give away the premise of the movie.
Spoiler
alert, right? but there's the opportunity to, let's say with like, I keep picking on this poor guy. I mean, he's doing, but he's doing, the senator there in Oklahoma is doing it for his constituency. He's advocating for it because he thinks it's right. But, hire 10, 20 kids, give them all a t-shirt uniform and start canvassing right around the district office. Yeah. And you want a nice view. You want the district staff to go, wait, who are these people walking around collecting signatures? And they're like, oh yeah, we're like the Tesla Bros Alliance. We're here to, we don't appreciate what your boss is doing, and we're gonna start. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Don't call it that. But you want to be like that could be a strategy to show, hey, we poked the bear of the retail investor community of the Tesla world that understands that this is essential. Like this thing that's happening has to continue, and that might be enough to then cycle up into the news to make sure other politicians don't stay so one singly biased perspective, and then start going, if I pick this fight, I'm going to get not just a bunch of Reddit comments and Twitter, but I'm actually going to get some canvassers, and there's a super PAC. They're doing, I don't know much about them. I don't have time, but I know that they exist suddenly. That starts to change then the politician has to start hedging back to their constituents, going like, I understand that you big concern about Tesla, blah, blah, but we have to figure out a way to move forward. In fact, that's what he came out recently talking about his legislation as like, you know, he said something like, I'm paraphrasing totally, but he said something like, I'm just trying to bring this issue to the table so that we can have this, bring everybody in to have this hard conversation. He's only saying that because he probably got a bunch of people online spamming his office, calling him, going, "What are you doing?" You know, he didn't know that probably even existed. You know, he probably never thought of it. He just thought Tesla's the bad guy, Elon's crazy, and gosh darn it, I got to protect our interest here. You know, my buddy down the street, he owns a few dealerships, and he's concerned, and so I got to do something, right? There's no back pressure right now, other than after the fact, after the bill got out of committee, after a bill works its way up, right?
Yeah.
So
what's really interesting about the Tesla community is that they seem to be very like good at organically sort of coming together for a cause if it appears existential. So like the entire reason why the YouTube community and sort of like I really started seeing this happen in like 2017, 2018, especially like into 2019, like especially into 2019 and 2018 was when the FUD was at a peak. Like it was freaking, I tell the story all the time.
Right? Was mostly the FUD directed at like the car, the
everything, dude. Cars gonna explode, you know, batteries are faulty, they're gonna go bankrupt, Elon's crazy, everyone's unhappy, there is a bad work practices every single day. Like literally, I remember there was like, it felt like forever. It was probably like 6 months, probably longer. But like I would come home after working, 12 to 14, 16 hours in a day, freaking exhausted. I would come home and then I would like open up my texts and I would see like messages from friends and families like, hey, did you see this article? I really think you should sell your stock and leave the company because it looks like the company's not going to succeed. So I'm like, okay, that's nice to come home to. All the work that I'm putting in.
2019, yeah, I heard about that. That was the time when I was mostly doing the nonprofit. I was talking to the corn growers guys.
Okay, yeah.
So when like climate change is fucking our business up. So sorry, just F-bombed on your show. But anyway,
no, you're good. I've done it twice already. I'll put an explicit warning. I'm not against cursing. Anyway. But I think. But what was really fascinating was seeing the sort of the very organic, natural support that the community started like all these YouTubers started coming out of nowhere. All these Twitter folks started coming out of nowhere. All the forums really started creating a lot of different incentives to try and sort of debunk a lot of the crap that was said. So like anytime an article will come out that was, proper bullshit, you would have like these efforts in the Twitter space and on the internet and through YouTube where people are like debunking what's going on. One of the earlier ones I can remember is there's this channel called Tesla Daily. It's run by a person, Rob Maurer. He's been doing it for I think 4 or 5 years. He's so good. Shout out to Rob Maurer. Invitation.
That's the one I recommend to anybody who doesn't know anything about Tesla. Be like, oh yeah, check this guy Rob out. Yeah, he will bring you up to speed.
He's great. He's so good. And one of the things he did was one of the premises that he had was like, hey, I'm just going to start. Here are all the articles that are happening that are going on right now that are not true that are talking about Tesla. And then the angle of the channel is, hey, I'm going to sit down and sort of give insight into what's actually happening. Like I'm actually going to tell the real story. So it's very interesting how that bubbled up, but it bubbled up in a time where it almost needed to bubble up because the attacks were so vicious and it happened every single day. Stock price was down. Tesla's going to go bankrupt. Elon says something weirdly funny on Twitter. Elon shouldn't be tweeting because he's crazy. He's losing his mind. A small miss on a profitability thing. Oh, Tesla is not keeping their promises. Model 3 ramp is late. Oh, it's proof that Tesla's going to go bankrupt. Like every fucking day something was coming out. So I'm really curious to see the existential nature of sort of the dynamic that we talked about. But also what I'm really like, oh, before we keep going, are you still good on time? I know we're a little over an hour now.
Keep going. Cool. Keep going. Yeah.
Cool. So I think one of the things that also really interesting is like one of the things I could see play out is say Tesla, say Tesla continues its growth trajectory, which I believe they will, but say Ford and GM aren't able to catch up, and then you have one of the developing things that's happening. I don't know if you've been sort of keeping up on this, but China is building some legitimate electric vehicle car makers, and they haven't been really secretive about this, but they're going to look to sell those cars here in the States, right?
Yeah, so one of the things, 30 companies, something like that. I heard 30 companies. Like it's a real industry at that point over there, right? Like
so I'm curious, like in the event that say what if the gap that's left by Ford and GM is filled by a foreign automaker, and it's just Tesla remaining, and they're the only legitimate American automaker? Like how do you see that sort of dynamic playing out in this case, or do you even see that as a potential dynamic? Do you think that there's enough in place to prevent that from happening? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that, because that's one of my legitimate fears, is that America goes from 3 to 4 automakers to just one because the other guys aren't able to shift gears fast enough. I don't know.
I mean, the debt load that GM and Ford, each of them carry, is amazing. It's just like, how are they going to retool all their factories for everybody? I don't know. I just think there will be consolidation. There'll be some merger acquisition for setting it up. I don't know what to say, because it's like, it's very possible. And at some point, if something really happens where a couple of these big guys implode, and too big to fail, that's not really true anymore, right? That financial world, that was certainly apparent that it can happen. Well, then we're gonna have to get a bunch of cars from China to keep turning over the fleet that we have. I don't know. I just see that this definitely plays into national security concerns. I think what Tesla's doing is just remarkable, and they should just keep focusing on making as many cars they possibly can, in my opinion. But we need, like, the crisis you pointed out just a moment ago, where in 2008, 2019, the FUD started to reach high, and then it motivated all these guys that were more just consuming the information to start, generating content back. That's exactly a good crisis shouldn't go to waste, in the sense that is exactly what has to happen. And in addition to it, you have to continue to organize, because the din of that may have gone down a bit. It certainly, when Tesla reached profitability, everybody's like, oh shit, this is real. Yeah. But it doesn't mean it can't happen again. And to the extent that these larger legacy automakers start to really face existential crisis, they're going to shift their $100 million marketing a year budgets towards, what do you think? Slowing down Tesla any possible way, creating market barriers anywhere they can get them, and just get real nasty about it. And I think that you want to have an organized approach, not just the Twitterati. Sorry, Twitter guys. Not just the Twitterati, typing in all caps of how unfair it all is, but an actual concerted group organizing on a strategic mission. I mean, you got to go the association plan here. You got to go through that. You don't ever want to, it wouldn't really help if you got a bunch of attack ads in Oklahoma, because in some ways you might be creating the crisis for that that congressperson to go back to his base and say, hey, see, they're all attacking me. They're coming at me. I need more money from you. In other words, the counter response could be worse, right? Yeah. Then you don't attack directly. You have a strategic plan. You go around the flanks and you create organized communication efforts, and getting out the votes in a way that signals that you're there, but you're willing to still, so that they don't go too crazy with their efforts of protecting their dealerships model, right?
Yeah.
There's a key. This isn't me. I don't know how to do that. You hire pros that do that kind of stuff and suggest the right approaches, but it comes down to what those goals are. But what I can say is that I'm worried, because I think it's going to get a lot worse than it's before it gets any better. Yeah. The more successful, Tesla becomes with their products and their ability to deliver. I mean, shoot, if they crack, fully automated driving, if they crack that nut, there's nothing. You'll have electric cars that you have to drive, or you'll get an electric car that you don't have to drive. Which car do you want? At that point.
Right. So, exactly.
And who knows how long it'll take to make that thing happen really fully, but they're making clear progress.
Yeah. For it to be like truly mass produced and for it to be like ubiquitous and everywhere, it's still gonna take a long time, at least a decade, right? At least. But even then, like one of the things you said that was super fascinating for me, it's kind of ironic, is that, in the event where Ford and GM really have to start throwing rocks at Tesla to try and slow them down, that opens the door for the national security issue to open up, and that's where China can swoop in and take all the sales.
Yeah, and maybe that's really the issue, because if you just sort of say, if you craft your narrative, hey, we shouldn't be throwing rocks at Tesla because we need to transition to help the environment, maybe that doesn't have the great enough, umph to, oh no, but China might then, the China narrative might be more effective, right? And so like you gotta stress test some of that. You gotta organize around that and really see who listens to it. At the end of the day, like associations usually have like a lobbyist for the Republicans, a lobbyist for the Democrats. The Democrats go out and lobbyists talk about health impacts and low income job growth, or those kinds of things that sort of children, the kind of like the hard stuff. They leverage that in those discussions, but then the same issues are just sort of change to then go with a conservative point of view, the impact to the local economy, the growth of business, the innovation, and of course China can go, that seems like an awesome switch to consider. And I know for sure most people don't understand how much more the auto market and how vast that auto market in China is growing. Like our guys they're just getting along. GM just opened up one factory. Like they should have had 10 of them by now. Yeah. Well, what is going on? Obviously, it's the incumbents. They had a model. They're stuck in their habits. They have pensions and unions, and there's just that thing that.
It's so interesting too, because if you even talk to like the wider public, like the thing that I still to this day that I hear, like it's still not, most people still don't believe that, this transition is actually legitimately happening. And I think that's part of... It's
hard to wrap your head around it.
It is. So it's almost like creating awareness around that discussion. I think it's going to be extremely important because, try going to a street, to a street corner, at a random street corner, and talk to the first 100 people and ask them like, okay, do you think the transition to electric vehicles is going to happen? Yeah, it's probably going to happen. Half of them will say that. The other half will say, nope, gas cars forever. And then of the ones that you ask, okay, the EV, transition, how long do you think it's going to take? Oh, I think it's going to take like 30 years. It's going to take a while. I don't think it's, because there's so many cars on the road and stuff. But the truth is, if you just take if you look at today's trends and just compare them to previous adoption curves for every single other technology that has ever happened on the history of the earth, this is going to be a 10 to 15 year transition. This ain't going to be a 30 to 40 year transition. And unless there's players truly ready to really make that transition happen yesterday, it will not happen. It will just not happen. And that leaves so much room open for, like we talked about, like those other companies from overseas to come in. But I think it's all rooted in the fact that I think people still don't believe this is happening. People still don't believe, like the mass, they might be fans of Tesla, they're fans of Elon, they're fans of the cars, but like that whole bigger picture of like, this is going to completely change the dynamics of the industry and how the world operates, and the supremacy of a country like, I don't necessarily have anything against China, but I know that this is going to open the door very widely for China to come in and essentially become one of the biggest, if not the biggest player in the automobile industry in the world, unless there's other people coming in filling in the gap. And Tesla can only go so fast. So fast. Short of them literally just becoming as big as Ford and GM combined, plus Tesla, plus Stellantis, which is, I don't know how many million cars a year they'll have to make at that point. Like, this is leaving the door open for another player to come in. And I think longer term, if I'm going to think, okay, so how does, like, what is a serious thing that can happen for us as a country, is like we start losing that manufacturing capability that we've been losing for the longest time. And this is just yet another thing that's happening, where because we were so slow to understand this sort of overall play that we've essentially given up our lead entirely. And there's people have been talking about this. I don't know if you follow Sandy Monroe, but he's an engineer on Tesla.
Yeah,
he's been around.
Seen some of his breakdowns.
Yeah, but he's talked about this. He's talked about how there's automakers in China that are legitimate. They're going to be legitimate players, longer term. And yeah, man, I don't know, man. It's just it's weird. It's such a weird time.
China has just sheer numbers of people. Like I can't remember who I was talking to. I think like city planners, something like. I don't know if these numbers don't make any sense. Probably I don't quite remember. But I remember like somebody said, yeah, in the U.S. we graduate like 3,000 city planners a year. For people that know how to plan a city, make it more better for everybody. But in China, it's like 300,000. It's like the order of magnitude of more brains. Whoa. Now you might say, hey, we have better education, technology first. Well, yeah, you can keep telling yourselves that, but they're hungry too. So they're working at it, and they're clearly making gains in all kinds of directions just on the sheer numbers of available people, right? So we like basically this whole discussion you just brought up and what Sandy just brought up, this is the pitch deck that you go in to conservative politicians and be like, hey, you can't just
there's no way they're gonna buy that though. Like this is such it feels so long term. You gotta
have somebody that can paint that picture for them, right? Like you gotta have that. You gotta have that's the work. That's the effort. That's like existing as an entity on some level and organizing around that, and then calling ahead and standing up and showing your little pitch deck and their perspective and what it means to their district. That's the other thing. They don't actually end up caring too much about the rest of the world if you can't link it to what it means to the specific district that you have. Like you're worried about Tesla. What you should be worried about is one of these 30 other companies that are eventually we're going to have to convert. Right. But I mean, part of the challenge is that there's so many possible directions threats can come to just slowing the EV growth. Right. Never mind Tesla, but just in general, that it's hard to picture where you would want. And so you got to have some people, some people on staff under a nonprofit. I mean, there's some out there here and there, but I didn't see that many. Like I went to Open Secrets website and I was like, well, let me look at what packs are there that cover, this stuff. And, you have all your utilities have packs, you have obviously your fuel, and then you have your alternative fuel companies, ethanol, corn, and so forth. But that's just like plain like footsies in the direction of transition. Like we really need to get, and there's going to be a real hard conversation about in the future bringing nuclear power back, because we got to upgrade the grid to deal with everyone plugging their cars in, and we need a lot more power. And we need it in a way that's concentrating those externalities. You just can't burn it and just dump it in the air. You just can't, right? Like we have to have that conversation, and that's a tough one. But I've had the nuclear, I forgot the name of it, but I had the Nuclear Association on the show, and they've started to notice that finally they're getting their due. They're getting some attention they didn't get before. The people are opening up to what is the current state of the situation there, right? Like what if we had to,
Was it the Russia thing that helped him get more attention, or was it before that?
Before that. That's like another climate change thing. It's another climate change thing, And they have better design. They have nuclear power plants that can shut down like without the passive shutdowns. You don't have to do anything. It melts some ice core thing that then brings in the stuff that stops the reaction. You're done. It's not Chernobyl anymore, but it's still scary. It's still a big public outreach issue. Like you would have to generate a ton of money just to deal with like educating the public around those particular issues, right? And that's what everybody's afraid of investing in nuclear power, is really like the pushback you would get from the public. But it's starting to happen. So those things, like, people that are in these institutions, they know that this change is happening. What they're trying to do is how do they shape some of that to benefit or to at least extend their current business models, their current way of doing business before it's like, lights off, we have to go batteries, or we have to go this way or that way.
Yeah. It's just, there's that work. And then, there's so many, it's not just like there's so many lobbies that would be, or so many industries that would have to like completely shift. Even the oil industry, the energy industry, that you got the dealerships, you got the entrenched automakers, you got people all along the supply chain that we're probably not even thinking about, that probably have some sort of skin in the game where this entire transition they would be hurt by. So there's like so many forces you would have to almost counter. But then on top of that, you also have to build the damn infrastructure and the supply chain of that new thing that in itself is going to be incredibly hard to do as well. So like there's just so many things that still have to happen for this thing to actually to take effect. And I think maybe that's a lot of the people that perhaps are not deciding to invest that time is they recognize the fact that there's just so much already out there that needs to be dealt with, that the problem seems too large. But if it doesn't get dealt with, someone else is going to come in and fix it. And then it's not necessarily going to be us.
It's either, well, you could, I mean, Elon mentioned it, carbon tax. I mean, you could create an escalating carbon tax on some level that funnels that money like kind of into this process. Like as soon as there's a little bit of a tax on that, then the investments start to make sense. Like part of the problem is that there's also no clear direction. So when do you invest in a nuclear power plant? Like if there's not much backing the potential for it, like it's, you're not going to get it from VC, venture capital guys. They want their money in 4 or 5 years, but these things take 10, 20 years to build and finance and so forth. So you need some kind of government intervention there. But if there's a carbon tax and it's got a schedule as it increases over time, now you can plan and forecast against that. Now you can create investments and assets that, you're going to get your money out of at some point, right? So it's a complicated thing. But one argument that I would make towards all that is, okay, well, we don't do anything. We won't do, forget it. Forget about trying. Let's, don't change. It's Mother Nature's going to mess us up real quick. Yeah. And for the longest time, I'm just sitting there waiting for like, all right, when do these storms start to get really gnarly enough? When do the scheduled fires in California every year start to really spread out to burn enough $1 million homes before all the insurance company and it turns out that it's happening now. Like it's already happened. Like there already people are the reaction's been happening. It's not very apparent sometimes where
slow. It's very slow. Yeah.
But it's like this sort of like, it's just like, it's like a hockey puck thing. It's just going to keep getting faster and faster. Yeah. And at some point you're going to see a ton of Teslas on the road.
Yeah.
Maybe more. You'll remember the days when there were other brand cars on the road.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily sure if that's even a good outcome where it's just Teslas out on the road.
Probably not.
That tells me something really bad has happened.
Right. If it's just emblems everywhere, not good, right?
Yeah.
Not good.
I mean, it'd be great as a investor and as a stockholder, but like when you're thinking about like the overall picture of like what does that mean, the implication of that long term, and then even Elon himself has said like there needs to be other players in the game. Like he wants other car makers to come into play. It feels like there's like these super like climate change and then this entire movement towards renewable energy. They both appear like trains that have already started and you cannot stop them. And you have to figure out how to build a track. Because if you don't, it's going to be just chaos. It's going to be absolute chaos. And, I don't know, man. Yeah. It's like, I'm trying my best to stay positive about the overall outcome. But I think what you described around creating a lot more awareness, especially in government, and really trying to figure out how to create a narrative or how to sort of build a story that the powers at be can actually digest, and it makes some sort of so it gives them a little bit of sense of urgency to try and tackle this problem earlier, I think will be long-term beneficial. But I think ultimately my biggest fear is that nothing happens until chaos comes, which is usually what usually happens in the past. Sure. Chaos comes, and then people will that's when they'll actually do it. And by then it might be too late, or by then it's like you'll come out with a half-assed thing that doesn't actually do anything. I don't know. That might be yeah.
I'm definitely not for one to be despondent, because I feel like this despondency, that sensation of like, it's just too overwhelming. There's nothing that can be done.
Yeah.
The people that fall into that line of discussion, like you're no better than the people that sort of denying that it's happening.
Yep.
It's like you're as useful as that other guy.
Right. You're both doing nothing.
Like, it doesn't do any good. You're not,
yeah.
Like the key is to, the thing I think about is that you could look at super PAC money and the billions that's being invested. And yes, the big behemoths of cash coming from energy companies and so forth to protect their interest. Sure. But it doesn't sometimes take much to poke them into an overreaction, or to create a scenario where, oh, wait a minute, this isn't the only game in town. Too much of that money, that kind of discussion is just, they're used to that. They don't know who else to turn to, right? They're not going to go on, Tesla Daily, right? What's his name? John Maurer.
Rob Maurer.
Rob.
Yeah.
Rob Maurer. I'm just terrible with names, by the way.
That's okay.
Rob Maurer. They're not going to go on Rob Mauer's show unless something's like poking them to like, you should go talk to him, about this, your perspective on whatever. Like you have to coordinate over time and organize around that. And so it's good that everyone's organized the way they are organically at this point, but there's another level to this game, and it's putting a little bit of cash and hiring some of those same pros that know some of those strategies and developing some like real pinpoint. It's sort of like it's like, let me give you the example. It's like putting you have a bunch of cars speeding in a particular part of the highway. You don't have to get them all with the speeding ticket. You just got to get one or two and make kind of a big deal about that in some way, to show, oh, there could be enforcement, or there could be, small
actions can have large implications.
Yes, especially in places where they're totally unexpected. That's the strategic. That's what a good communication strategy would help. A professional would help, like determine like what's the best spot to make a little bit of a push. Not in this sort of weirdly activist going to interrupt the meetings or like, no, right. I mean, show them an effort. It doesn't take that much money. It's not in the 6-figure sums. It's just sort of like showing that you're there is usually enough to make somebody think twice about not including Tesla in the next speech or in the big press about EV world. And like, oh, well, I don't want to start attracting some of that super PAC money towards me. There's just has to be that thing. And maybe it's just you and I talking about it, I guess. Hopefully maybe somebody out there that's done really well could think about that. It's not that hard. You just gotta...
What's really interesting, that the immediate picture that came to my head when you said that is like, if there was a senator or a representative or even say a presidential candidate who like literally would mention Tesla and say Tesla is the greatest American company, whatever rhetoric you want to push that's positive for Tesla, the Tesla community would freaking rally around that person so hard, and they will make sure that person's name is constantly repeated in discussion, like without a doubt. Well, because the community and the company has been dragged through the mud so many times in the past, that any sort of like, say, personality or person that actually has influence in government or policy actually says something, and they make some sort of a platform around the fact that Tesla in the EV world is good, but also like definitely get the Tesla name in there and make sure you paint him in a positive manner, bro. Like they would get so much support. It would be ridiculous.
you would be just in this like hour, 2 hours we just talked about, just came up with like 2 or 3 strategic approaches. We could do that. Let's fly into DC.
Let's start it.
And you and I are just going to walk down, here, the Russell building, knock on their doors and be like, hey, we're looking for somebody that would be willing to mention Tesla and a few press releases from your offices. This is how it would impact your district. Here's the data on it. This is why you should get behind it. And by the way, watch out. China might come take your constituents, union shops if we don't do something. Like that's it. I mean, that is it. That's like you have to think through that, put together a little plan, and then you have they call them a day of action on the Hill. You have an annual event, get everybody together, you give them all the note cards, and then you just walk 100 people on Capitol Hill.
That's so fascinating.
The Tesla bros are on the Hill today.
The Tesla
and
bros.
You better watch out because you might end up on one of their YouTube channels if you don't say the right thing, and if you don't somehow pander to their interest a little bit, and but just to make them aware that the community exists and that it's done financially well so far.
It's powerful. It's a powerful community, man. It's a powerful community. I think what's also interesting is that I think a lot of folks in the community, though, like, just from my casual conversations, and I'm still trying to formulate my thoughts around this, but like they probably find that whole dynamic kind of sleazy, it's like, of course. And I think I'm curious if that's why perhaps that hasn't happened yet. It's because sort of like, the way Tesla and sort of the community sees solving problems, it's like, it's first principles thinking, and we just have to innovate on the process. And
what's sleazy about it? Advocating for your interests to the representatives that represent you. I think it's like
the whole, like, you got to stick a little bit of money in someone's pocket, either passively or, directly.
No, that's why. That's why I said no. Well, see that. Hold on. Forget Pat.
So you got to reframe that, right? You got to reframe that. Yeah.
No, do it the way the big boys do it. You do a super PAC, and then you get to spend it any way you want. Don't coordinate with the politicians. Don't have any communication. Right. Just decide. Like, could be buying some, ads on a particular district, or like it could be a variety of things, which is what people are doing anyway now by creating YouTube channels and writing Twitter. But like also walking the halls of your local, your state capital. If anybody watches a show that's in Oklahoma, you should pick up the phone and call that guy and tell him what you thought, because they will put it on a check mark one against that, and they'll just collate your email. Another, if you really want them to read something, the old trick of like write your letter and overnight it by FedEx. So they'll open those. They will open those FedEx over. That must be pretty important.
Yeah.
Your state politician something, and they don't need a lot. They just need to know that you're there and that you're paying attention. That's the main thing. And to some degree, that has to be coordinated, because it can't just be like one person or two people. There has to be like a come on a consistent basis. That's why associations are good, because there's reason to meet together. There's the the annual event, there's continuing education, there's some webinars, there's just this thing that keeps you paying attention over time. It could be around these shows, it could be all everybody that already has this sort of voice out there. But we I think that there's a gap is what I'm highlighting.
Yeah,
there's a little gap there that's time to gel around it, and don't wait for Tesla to do it. They're going to do what they're going to do. They're going to defend their interests. They have attorneys and so forth, but the retail investor, the community, there's still another level to this.
Sure.
I'm not suggesting that if anybody's actually thinking of starting a super PAC because of any of this, like just find an attorney, one in DC somewhere, have your like there's a lot of detail, but I'm just sort of what I've been able to glean off of just working around these people over the years is that's how it's done. That's the way issues are pushed and evolved. So
I mean, it's great. Honestly, it's great insight, because for me speaking, like this has been a very eye-opening discussion for me, because it helps me understand the inner workings of how stuff actually we try to get stuff done on the Hill and in government. Like, these are how things typically get done. Like, for me as an outsider who's, not very involved in that, but I have a cause. I have something that I'm passionate about, which is, Tesla's success and our overall transition to electric vehicles, and obviously America's success within that context, and how America can become a huge player in that, and sort of how local governments and state governments can help push that. So I can definitely see a correlation there for sure. And I do think at some point, I mean, if especially the scenarios that we played out actually happen, like, we're going to have no choice but to figure out how to make that sort of thing happen. It's just, we can't wait too long, or we can't be sort of reactive to it. We almost have to be proactive, right?
Yes,
we have to get ahead of the curve.
Yes, yeah, just that's where you need a little bit of cash, right? Just, and it's not like gobs of it, but it's you need some contribution to pay for that canvasser person that knows the district, or that communications director that knows how to, take all these the insights that we're providing and craft material that you would then take on the Hill. Like, there's stuff there that just money it's required, right? But it's not a whole lot. I did have one thought. It just lost my train of thought on one thing that I wanted to suggest. Hold on, it's in my notes. No problem. It'll come back. But anyway, Farzad, I do. You know what? I do think that there are groups out there. I haven't done enough research into them, and so I think one of the things I'm going to do on my show is, even though I'm kind of over the association world, is I think I'm going to try to bring some of them and have some further deeper interviews with them. There's like a group I came called the Energy Innovation. I don't know anything about it. I haven't, but I got a feeling that they're in that direction of like trying to keep the transition happening as quickly as possible. So it's something to also consider. Like, there's a lot of people that sometimes get motivated to start a nonprofit, but the rule of thumb really is, don't start a nonprofit. Find the nonprofit that's already started.
Gotcha.
Because nonprofit business is difficult. The administrative load is significant. But I like super PACs. It doesn't seem that complicated. It's just some filing and put some cash in the bank, and then you decide what you want to spend it on, right? Like, you could do whatever there, practically, it seems like, which is also the reason I hate super PACs, because we shouldn't have outsized volume of money dumped into our political system. Right. It's just I mean, I think overall, dude, like and I think that's some of my like partial hesitation into some of this is because of that. It's because like we know how government and money interplaying together can be. And again, this is not technically, you're not directly, you're just a separate voice that's like an arm, you know what I'm saying? But like, yes, please, I'm not shilling for this. I'm just saying that's how the big boys are playing, and we're not there yet. So at some point you got to join that. You got to play the game. You got to play the game. Yeah, I know. I get you 100%. And I think it's a very obvious, I think it's going to potentially become the largest gap for Tesla if certain things play out. Like, if politicians don't wake up and they actually realize that this is a positive thing and they are supportive of Tesla, and if it somehow becomes into a negative narrative, I do think it's going to be dramatically important for that movement to start. I worry that one of the arguments, I'm rooting for Tesla to get a lower priced car on the road. They will. Because I think that's going to be, do you have a sense of when like that might happen? My gut tells me, so this year they were very open about saying how for 2022, they're not going to start any new models, but probably 2023 into 2024, they've talked about a $25,000 vehicle, which is probably going to be $30,000 after inflation, this whole inflation shit. Yeah, but that's a key component because that'll get rid of Teslas are just lugged for the rich, like wealthy, and those will drive themselves too. That's the sort of the goal, is that even the cheaper cars will be able to drive themselves as well. So you've really dramatically improved the cost of entry for somebody, because you start having a scenario where you don't even have to purchase a car. You theoretically could just like hail a self-driving Tesla and you pay, 20 cents a mile to get around, which is like a fraction of the cost of owning a car. That's a potential outcome. I worry that if these legacy automakers start cracking before that lower price car entry exists, I worry that there's going to be like, I mean, yeah, I've seen videos of people like keying a Tesla because they just like hate it. It's just like, this rich boy Tesla thing, So I just think that there's something. I hope that happens quickly, but also because we need more cars.
Yeah.
Of them, right?
No,
like,
it would definitely happen. It will definitely happen. I mean, I do think, and here's the deal: like Tesla is the only one that's equipped to do that because they've actually built a supply chain and they have the synced cost already into the factories, and they've become extremely good at throwing up new factories, right? And they have the costs correct. They have the cost controls from a battery perspective, from a drivetrain perspective, and they are the only ones that truly have a supply chain built for an affordable car. I don't think anybody else. Maybe some of the players in China also have that because they have so much government backing. Where they're basically subsidizing any losses they would have from having to sell a car that cheap with very thin, if any, profit margins. But if you're thinking about a private company that doesn't need outsized government support, Tesla is really the only one, in my opinion, on this entire planet that can actually crank out a $25,000 car.
Yeah, those are the moats for Tesla.
Yes,
those are the protected moats.
Yeah, and then you layer self-driving on top of that. Then you have it's insane. And this, again, it goes back to like the thing where like my worry is that Tesla's dominance is going to be so freaking obvious and so unstoppable that it's like the outcomes from that are going to be potentially very detrimental. Like it could be a net negative. Like Tesla being so successful could be a net negative because nobody else can play, and the only ones that can play are the Chinese because the government backs them. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's scary, but the cheaper cars coming probably in a couple of years. I initially thought it was going to be next year. Yeah, a couple of years.
Well, COVID messed up. I'm sure all kinds of planning and like the build outs of the Giga Berlin and so forth have been slow. And
so the biggest reason that Elon gave is because the Model Y has so much freaking demand that it doesn't. Starting a new car is like almost idiotic because they have a year's plus, potentially maybe more, worth of demand for the Model Y. So even if they're ramping that car as much as they can, they're still going to be backlogged. So if you introduce a new car that's even cheaper, then you're going to have 5-year backlogs. It's like, that's ridiculous. Like, you can't be doing that. So you got to build the sort of supply. You got to build that. You got to diminish your demand first for your other products before you introduce that new product line, because your demand will just be through the roof, which tells me, this is sort of one of my theories, is that a lot of that cheaper car build out is going to be done in secret. And then once they're actually ready to announce it, they'll be like, oh, by the way, you can purchase this car tomorrow and it'll be delivered to you in a month or two. Because if they don't do that,
amazing.
You know what I'm saying? If they don't do that, they run the risk of like just completely disrupting,
overwhelming with the bids for the requests in advance.
Because you think about how much demand that's going to get, it's going to be insane.
How big these gigafactories? Like how many old? Like I know there's always they got them going, and then they got to like ramp up. These are large facilities. How many cars could like Giga Berlin eventually be producing out of that space?
Yeah, so Giga Berlin's initial, I believe, is 500,000 cars a year, if I remember correctly. But if you look at something like Giga Texas, so Giga Texas, the amount of acreage that they've purchased is 10 times larger than the next largest factory, okay? And the factory in Texas can probably crank out in their first phase, and this is me just guessing. These are people just guessing, right? Probably 1 million cars. Fremont is close to 650,000 cars, I believe, right now. If you add up all the models, maybe even higher.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's going to be bananas. And when somebody asked Elon when he unveiled the Berlin factory, like how many gigafactories do you see being built in the next 10 years to be able to get to 20 million cars per year? Then he said 10 more. 10 more gigafactories, or 10 total. I forget what he said exactly. Wow. But even if it's 10 more, they have how many factories right now? 4 factories open right now between the Giga Texas, Berlin, Shanghai, and Fremont. You add 10 more, that's 14. That's still well over 1 million units per year for each one of the factories. So for each factory they throw up, you can assume they're making about 1.4 to 1.5 million cars a year. So. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's a lot of cars in the pipeline. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of
Hey,
cars in the
GM's
pipeline.
got their first one. I wonder how
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Good luck with them. Yeah. I want to
All
ask you a
right.
couple of questions actually
Yeah.
before we
Oh,
wrap
sure.
up. So, I'm curious, like you said you've talked to, 500 plus CEOs and leaders of nonprofits, and you've obviously had a lot of different experiences where you've talked to very talented people, you've talked with leaders and everything like that. So I'm curious, like based on everything we've talked about, but I'm also curious, like within a broader sort of scope, are you overall optimistic or pessimistic about where we're going?
Oh, optimistic.
Okay, why?
A lot more optimistic. Yes, a lot more. I would say that if you had asked me this question like 3 or 4 years ago, I would be a lot more dour about it. But
Okay.
yes, overall, a lot more optimistic because I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen with other initiatives, diversity inclusion initiatives that suddenly went from like non-existent in Washington, D.C. You just have a bunch of elderly white guys sitting around making association trade deals, things like that, to, oh, we need this program. We need and not just a watered down like side stage at the annual event for women to talk about their stuff. Like conservative mentorship, like you can't, if you're an association of any size in the Washington, D.C. area that doesn't have some diversity and inclusion component to it, it don't look good. It looks pretty, it's not good. It's not good. And so that, like, when you think about like, well, what was the financial motivation around that? Who made that thing happen? How did that transpire? That's a whole other story. But at the end of the day, it goes to show that organizations can change and from within with their vested interest and biases and everything that's involved with that. So I'm positive overall. And if not, well, then eventually there'll be enough climate disasters that eventually everybody will freak out and have to do something. That's what's going to happen. I mean, that's the thing. That's it. Like, how much can you avoid doing until, and it does suck, but they don't put a street light on a dangerous corner until somebody gets hit by a car, like that has existed, but it's moving all across in that direction. So the question is now accelerating this effort, moving it faster and making it just like the normal thing. What is you make a product, you should know what the carbon cost is that to the product, and what are you doing to mitigate or reduce? You should just know. Now, really hard to do that, but that's the direction every industry has to go into.
But that's encouraging. I mean, even after all those discussions, I like to ask this question of my guests who have like had podcasts or I've talked to other people. And generally that's the kind of guidance I get, is like they're overall positive because they do see positive change happening in the world. So like, I think, and I tend to agree too. Like I used to be a little bit more pessimistic about it, but the more I talk to people, the more I'm like, yeah, man, there's a lot of freaking smart people here, man. Like the world's got a lot of smart people that are very passionate about doing stuff. And a percentage of those folks will actually be able to execute on those things as well because, either because they're passionate about it or they've made the decision to involve themselves in it. So that's very encouraging. And so that's good to hear. And then, so one more question, actually two more. I'm going to give you two more questions here. Okay. Through this whole 6-year journey with your podcast, what is the biggest thing that stands out to you?
My particular journey for my show, obviously, the change, the weird fact that climate change is going to change the way everybody has to do business, and that I'm seeing it happen in real time. And that there are industries that are getting ahead of that. And that there are companies, amazing fucking companies like Tesla, that are not just succeeding at making a change or product, but cashing in. Like they're like the possibility exists to transition us off this course that we're in, this direction. I guess I'm not that I mean, I'm not like an environment. I'm not the crazy environment. Like we need things. We need like we need plastic. No plastics in the environment. There's just things that we need, but it's like energy costs. I'm not somebody who's just off the cuff. This is just going to happen. But but that has been the culmination. That's why I changed the direction of my show. That's why I decided to now I want to talk to those companies making those innovative products. Like I can't just be a Tesla out there. Like there's got to be others, and there definitely are. There definitely are a ton of interesting companies that are creating products. There's like I had a really cool one where they're generating energy from a thermionic device that you can basically, it's two plates that you can, if you heat the electrons on one plate and some of the electrons will push into the next with the gap, you can generate electricity, and that can go into our furnace. They have a product, they want to build it so that you can power, as you heat your water heater, it's generating some electricity right out of the damn heat. We're wasting heat. It's stupid. We're burning natural gas to heat the water because we need hot water. But why is this device not in all those things? It's like simple. Well, not so simple creating they had to use neural network. There's the whole explanation on that episode that he lost me a little bit in the one explanation. I have to go back and listen to it. But they had to use a neural network to actually get the right variability, like the right amount of the material. Like too many electrons creates a backfill, and not enough electrons moving through the thing. It's like super complicated and fascinating, but it's stuff like that I'm seeing everywhere. And so that's awesome. That's fantastic. It's innovation that's exploding, and a lot of it has to do because of AI and the tools that we're getting from Amazon. So awesome. Amazon Web Services, Jeff Bezos. Anyway,
thanks, Jeff.
Everything leads back to Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, I know everything's Amazon and Amazon. All right, one last question before I let you go. What do you think is humanity's purpose?
Oh, shit, that's a hard one. Oh, humanity's purpose. It's pretty simple. I think it's a hard one to conceptualize, but it's pretty simple, I think, to decide that what it should be. And I think it's to serve others. I think fundamentally to figure out a way to like alleviate a little bit of suffering in someone else. We're all going through our journeys. We're all trying to figure out what we're doing. We don't all get it right, but to some degree, I think if you can just be kind in your efforts, that's the purpose of humanity, I think. Wow. Just like you hit me a little bit on that one.
Yeah, I always like to end these like usually we're like on a long like conversation, and then I usually save like the most philosophical like like brain fuck or whatever of a question for the last bit after someone's potentially already burned out. I'm like, what is humanity's purpose? I'm very fascinated by that. Like ever since I sort of started my journey, since trying to discover what I want to do, like I think that's where I'm landing as well. And a lot of times when I ask that question, that's sort of the theme that I get is that we're just here to really help each other out. Like we're all a group of people that are trying to make things better for ourselves, but then it's also the amount of pleasure you get from helping others as well is like, I think it's part of our DNA. Like there's a reason why when you help somebody, you feel so good. It's because there's something more than just like the action. It's embedded in your DNA. And I've been reading this book, Sapiens. I don't know if you've ever read the book, but it's a fascinating, I highly recommend it. I'm not done with it yet, but it's a fascinating story of like humanity's evolution from like, 200,000 plus years ago to where we are now, and just the common themes that keep coming up like through the decades and through the years and millennia of humans being around on the earth. It seems to be like that cooperation is always constant, that trying to figure stuff out together and helping each other out is it's a constant. So the fact that you said that, I think again reinforces the fact that that is embedded in our DNA, and we have to figure out how to get more of us in that situation where we are able to do that, get ourselves out of that freaking rat race that so many of us get stuck in, or either out of because of want or survival, right? A lot of us are stuck in that situation because of survival, and like how can we get humanity to a situation where more of us can do that? So yeah, I feel very deeply connected to what you just said. So I appreciate you. I think
there's a sense of satisfaction you can get that you can't get from most things that involves like just lifting someone else up.
Yeah.
Knowing that it's not going to do much for you anyway, in the sense that it's not like I'm just helping you up so that I can do feel better. It's just sort of that process of like, I see some pain in the world, taking the responsibility, putting that weight on your own shoulders, and then just moving forward. And one thing to make sure that I contemplated a lot of is, don't get caught up with all the things you're not in control of, like all of the news and all the stuff in the war. Like, we can't do much about a lot of that. But if you spend too much time paying attention to that, then you're not paying attention to the things you can change, which is right now, and the garden you have, and the people you're connected to, and the things you can do today that's within your reach. In fact, doing a disservice to everyone else that's suffering in other ways if you don't pay attention to that and figure out a way to like make life a little bit better for all of us. So that's why I love this. That's why I love the Tesla community. I love the story, and I'm in. I'm
so beautiful.
I own some stock. I'm gonna hold on to it. Like, this is it. Like, this is.
And if anybody wants to start a super PAC, hit up Ernesto. I'm just kidding.
I'll connect you to some friends.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you so much, man. I had a freaking blast. I was like, awesome. I think 2 hours, man. I really appreciate you. Yeah, crazy. Freaking flew by. You're welcome back anytime, bro. Like, honestly, like, I really enjoy talking to you. I really do. I feel like we have a really good back and forth. Dude, if you want to put this on your platform too, feel free. I'll definitely put it on mine, and I'll reference your socials and everything. One last time for everybody who hasn't heard of you, you want to give sort of your channel and your socials and all that good stuff?
Yeah, the YouTube channel, Through the Noise Podcast.
Perfect.
That's it. That's the easiest way to find me. Yeah.
Perfect. And then they can also look you up on Spotify and all the other podcast platforms.
Oh, yeah. Right? We're on all the other. Yeah. But the YouTube channel is the part that's like the most embarrassing. It's like, man.
Okay. So everybody go there.
It's like, if you're going to click on something, click over there, please. That helps.
Okay. Perfect. Cool. All right, man. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take it easy, brother. And thank you for hanging out with me, and have a great weekend.
Again soon. Bye.
Hell yeah. Let's do it. Take it easy. Bye.